Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to our cave. I am a Reed.
I am a rider.
And we are vampires from a very long time ago. I don't know where my accent went.
I mean, yeah. Maybe one time I tried to do like a Spanish accent and I somehow slipped into Jamaican.
I like it.
Stop it. You never get to do accents. And I was like, I know, I just can't hold on to them. They're really slippery.
They really are. And then it's just like civilization, right? One time it's like, oh, this is an English accent. No, that's Australian. It's like, no.
You're doing it wrong.
That's Irish. No. That's Canadian. Oh, no.
No. Oh,
no.
Yeah?
Did you know that Canadians drink milk out of bags? Like you go to the
Like
grocery store.
A paper sack?
No, like a plastic bag. Like and go instead of getting a carton, like a cardboard carton or like a plastic gallon or half gallon. It's a sack. It's a plastic bag.
Do they just like jam a straw in there and get after it?
No, there's actually an udder on the bottom.
So,
It's like, we did the work, so do you.
Yeah.
You have to do the work.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Eh?
I'm sorry, I'm asked. Where are the donuts? I've been there, so now I can say all
Now
these
you
things
could
because
say
they're all
things like-
100% accurate.
Every cliche is accurate.
It
all
is.
the
It
time.
is.
Yeah.
No, but the milk is actually a real thing. When we went to the grocery store and like we just saw it, it was just like, what? But evidently, like ever since however long it's been, they decided to do that, and so like everyone at home has a milk pitcher. Like they sell them too. You know, you can buy the $5 one at Walmart or a nicer one or whatever. But it's just like a pitcher that you literally drop the bag in and you cut off the corner. Like
Okay.
the closest comparison I could think is like in America when you get the prepackaged roll of cinnamon rolls and you get the icing and you just take off the corner and you kind of squeeze and drizzle it
Is
out.
that how you do that?
Yeah.
Oh, I've been doing it wrong.
You just take a big thing and just
Right into my mouth.
You just screw it.
I said udder.
Well, as
An udder
vampires,
full of
as
icing.
vampires, you never learned the
No,
proper
I
icing
just
way.
puncture it with my canines.
Yes,
That's the sound
okay,
that
hold on.
vampires make.
You've got this problem with numbers, evidently.
I keep going. What over?
Because I even erased it so you wouldn't increment based off of yesterday's wrong number.
Wait, look. Let me fix that
Oh
real
my
quick.
goodness! Oh, there we go. Oh, now it's episode Ghost instead of episode 50.
There we
I
go.
like it.
Now
Perfect.
We can get on with the show.
Yesterday was episode 48. 48.
Yes.
And it was Monday the 6th.
Ooh. Yeah, and we're approaching Big 5-0 on the episodes right
We are.
now.
We powered right through our midlife crisis.
Yeah, we did.
I think we should buy a
I
car.
didn't get maybe a convertible?
A boat.
A boat.
A car boat.
Oh, with wings.
Yes.
Just in case.
A car boat plane.
And a submarine, too. Yes. Yeah, we're going to need
An engineer.
maybe a GoFundMe.
Yes. Please help us buy our car boat plane because our podcast had a middle-age crisis.
We got to 50 episodes and didn't know what to talk about anymore.
Yes, we did. Well, let's talk about, what's important with age in a second because I want to recap yesterday before we get sidetracked.
Oh, yeah.
So yesterday, I know for sure yesterday we talked with our challenge. We ended with a challenge where we are encouraging you guys to be a little bit more self-aware and, based on where you're at with your mental health journey, which regardless of whether or not you like to think of yourself on a mental health journey, you're on a journey. You just might be in is the prologue the beginning?
Yes,
Yeah. You just might be in the prologue and you just not know it, or the table of contents.
Yeah, I think most of us got a nice kick in the pants with COVID. It's like, oh, yeah, mental health. It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, here's one to you.
Yeah, you should have some. Yeah, we covered a lot of we talked, our challenge was about awareness, right? Just like being aware of what you're doing in any given moment. And part of that comes from this idea we were talking about procrastinating. And sometimes I think with procrastination, it's just being aware that you are procrastinating. Like that's one of the biggest steps. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm not doing the thing I should be doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. And one I'm not sure that we brought up yesterday is like you sat down on the couch and I was like, you're like, oh, I thought of some other things from yesterday. I'm like, me too. Yay! But we missed him. We forgot him. But that's going to bound to happen. And that's the beauty of going on every day. And That's what I'm really glad you brought that up, because the first step in stopping procrastination is probably recognizing, one, that you do it at all,
Yeah.
which is probably a little easier to do. And then the second one, which is a little harder, is recognizing it in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the tools that helps against procrastination, which we may talk about a little later today, but we might save for another day, is time blocking. And it's kind of like medicine that you don't want to take. For Danielle and me, my wife, like we've known that for a long time that we need to do time blocking. And in fact, Danielle was actually on a call with a friend who she has kind of as an accountability buddy, and she's like, "Oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's all these things I need to be doing, and I know I need to do this, but I'm not. I know I need to do that, but I'm not." And then she's like, "Have you tried time blocking?" He's like, "I know time blocking. I've known time blocking forever, but we just haven't done it." So we're actually, Danielle and I we're time blocking today, because yesterday,
nice.
Danielle never cries. She never gets upset. She never gets emotional. So that was a first. So that was a sign. It was like, oh man, we need to do something.
Something's going on here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just like Reed's never
I'm
sarcastic.
aware of this moment. Yeah.
But more importantly, where'd your hair go, man?
Oh man.
Let's get a close up on that.
Oh jeez. Okay, so yeah, not a bad haircut, but not. I was telling Reed, I was complaining this morning about my haircut. And
It's a good thing you didn't fail our complain challenge.
Yeah, I totally failed that. I fail everything, as we mentioned repeatedly on the show. One of the things I got a nice haircut, but the problem with almost every haircut I've had in the last like 5 years is it's not the haircut I ask for. I come in and I say, this is what I want. I want, want it to stay long. I want this. I want that. I've gone in before and said, don't cut the top, period. And they promptly start cutting on the top or the whatever. Anyway, there's like what I've figured out is there's 3 haircuts. And no matter what you ask for, you're going to get one of the 3 at most places. And sometimes I'll go to places thinking if I pay more, if it's more expensive, I will somehow get what I ask for. Yet they just do what they do every time.
I think I've got a theory here.
Yeah.
So giving haircuts, especially at certain salons, you get busy enough to where you get in this rhythm, this almost like bricklayer type rhythm. And so it's like, all right, client comes in, client talks at you, you nod and smile, you start cutting client's hair, they leave somewhat happy, probably not, but then they just keep going. The next person comes, right? And so they're just used to it. So the first step you need to do if you want to get the haircut you want is you got to get their attention. You got to make sure they're really paying attention. Now you could just be like, hey, and just give them keep your pen strong.
What for?
Yeah. And say, good morning. Do I have your full attention now?
Yeah. One of the things I bumped into, because I'm kind of adventurous when I go to hair salons. I usually go out of town and to go to one because I'm just like,
the ones in town no longer take you.
Yeah. Or I'll no longer take them, right? Like I think I have tried literally 9 or 10 barbershop hair salons in the McKinney area, downtown McKinney area. Not a single one has ever done what I've asked for. Man. Except for one where I went in and I just told the guys, just take it all off.
Just want to make sure, like, good. The guy on the corner with the cardboard box and the rusty blade. That's not
that's not
a haircutting place.
Yeah. But I gave him a shot anyway because he couldn't be worse than everyone else.
Capitalism at its finest. That's what we talked about yesterday, and now today we were hearing a little bit about Ryder's butchered haircut, which at least it still looks good.
Oh, it's fine. It's just once again not what I asked for.
Yeah. Next time maybe you should try in Spanish. And you walk in and be like, my name is Inigo Montoyo.
You killed my father.
But I need my hair to be cut nicely for the funeral.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the other thing, is there was a translation issue. So when I say I'm a little bit adventurous, went into a place where like one guy speaks English. And I was like,
did you get a sombrero cut? I don't know.
Where they
like a bowl cut and sombrero cut.
I mean, they
can you imagine just like a plate of hair just going straight out? Like, you're going to need to glue this every day.
The guy did ask me if I wanted a mohawk, though. And I was like, if I would have known they were going to do this, I would have just said mohawk because it has more style. So, yeah. Anyway, circling back around, I think on the procrastination thing, I wanted to bring up maybe 2 more things that I thought about last night as I was falling asleep.
Yeah.
If that's okay. One thing about procrastination is I remember in school having a friend who would procrastinate, but he would only procrastinate with the professors he knew he could get away with it with. And there was something about that.
Sounds like me.
There's like a psychology in there that it's like, if there is a hard and firm deadline and you know it's not moving, then you can get over your procrastination. But when you know you can get around it, whenever you can manipulate somebody, whenever the deadline is not firm,
Yeah.
and that was just with students and in school. And so I don't know if that applies to the rest of life.
I think it does, to be
Okay.
honest. I mean, as a guy who was that person, who probably still is that person, like, again, go back to caveman brain, right? Like, I see so many people who like get mad at their dogs. I'm like, do you know, like, let's walk through logically what just happened and tell me that you think they shouldn't be acting the way they are, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, if there aren't real consequences for my actions, why would I stop doing them, right? And so let's look at Lincoln. Well, Lincoln, one time he grabbed a whole chicken carcass that had been a rotisserie chicken we picked.
Yeah.
He grabbed a whole chicken carcass and took it out. And, oh, we yelled at him kind of angrily and stuff like that, but we don't hit him because, that would just be wrong. But that's all we do. We yell at him. So it's like, well, guess what? He's still going to try and sniff at the trash. And, if we're not looking, he might grab something out of there. And it's not enough to be a problem, but it's like, how can you blame the guy, right?
Yeah, yeah. And this is the other thing though, is when you're okay with saying, how can you blame them? And then there's no sort of training or responsibility built in, where there's nothing that sort of helps them into the future to not continue to make the same errors. So there's something about all that I just was thinking about. I don't have solutions for it, but I do remember one of my buddies talking to me about how he's like, oh no, well, I knew that this professor would let me get away with blah blah blah, and then he talked about feeling guilty because he felt like a piece of crap for manipulating this guy, but he was manipulating somebody so that he could basically just faff around. And you're just like, so your time not doing the thing you want was more important than maintaining sort of the sort of sterling reputation that you could have had with this other individual. And so it was kind of difficult because he put both of them into a difficult position. Like, he didn't like himself when he procrastinated, and he didn't like what he had to do to the professor. And of course, then the professor liked him less too, because the professor felt taken advantage of. So there was a little loop there that I kind of watched go around. And anyway, it just stuck with me and popped in my head last night, so I figured I'd throw it out on the show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the short answer is, I don't think there is a right answer, right? But I do think that I do think that, especially as coming from a guy who's struggled with procrastination his entire life and has been very good at talking his way out of things, I think harsher consequences, especially earlier on in life, could help retrain that. Now, that being said, you could argue, well, hey, we talked on a previous show about how I was talking about how after we left high school, when the bell strikes time, they literally drop a gate and they force everyone through the office, and it's detention slip no matter what. And if you get 2 or 3, you got to go to suspension or whatnot. And they took that decision, they created a system to take that decision out of the teacher's hands, right? And that happens sometimes in school stuff too, where it's like, the deadline says 11:59, bro. I'm sorry. That it's an electronic thing. You can't get past it. So that's one way they do it. But you could argue on the
that's a good way.
Well, so yes and
I'm
no.
sorry.
No, you're good.
I don't want us to go off into some weird tangent.
You're good, because I do want to answer that, because I think it depends on the point and what you're trying to achieve. And as a professor or as an educational place, what do you want? And at the end of the day, in my opinion, what they want, if they're a good school, is they want to create and develop and enrich somebody, right? They want to make that person do more things and learn more things. And I would argue that you're going to get more of that if you enable them to do the thing. But if you set it up to where they don't have to meet as many deadlines, it's maybe quote unquote easier, but they're still going to do the work. But if you pull the deadline earlier, then another thing, whether it's intentional or not, is if you make a deadline 7 p.m. instead of, say, midnight, or even better, in my opinion, like 3 a.m., something like that, or 4 a.m., you're going to create a lot more interactions between the students and the teachers, because that deadline is more of a real thing, right? Because a thing that procrastinators will do is they're going to put it off until the very last minute. And just realistically, that if that last minute's at 7 p.m., there's going to be a lot more late submissions than if it's at midnight, and there's going to be even more than if it was at like say 3 and 4 in the morning, right?
Yeah, and here I guess we talked about nudges earlier, and there's these ideas that you can say put something at the right place and the right time, and then that nudge is going to help people sort of help be more accountable or take care of themselves because it's just human nature in a certain way. I'm also just kind of curious about this idea of needing to set up more and more systems, right? The idea of gates closing so the teachers don't have responsibility of the students. And then we're talking about forcing compliance out of students. You have to do this because we said you had to do this, except for it's a system doing it, not an individual. So
Right.
you don't have an individual in authority in which there's a hierarchical relationship. It's the system. So then apparently you can't be mad at anybody. So no one ever wants to not be liked. No one ever wants to have an argument. And you just go, oops, the system did it.
Right.
And which we all know is kind of BS anyway, because some person set the system in place.
Well, that's what helps shift it. Going back to the caveman brain, the us versus them, right?
Yeah.
Well, and in the situation you're talking about, it's the student versus the teacher, me versus the teacher. Well, in the system, it's the teacher and the student versus the problem, right? And so now the bad guy is somebody else, right? So it's a subtle shift, but it makes a really big difference. And yeah, it's like you get angry all you want. Do you want to go argue to the dean? And it's like, I'm not going to go argue to the dean and say, oh, let me use some of my paper late. I'm sorry. Although people do that in college, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it's like it takes a little bit of air out of the argument. It feels less right or easy to argue. When it's just one person who's your professor, especially if you have a rapport with them, you're like kind of pulling on that. And yeah, you're right. It does put the teacher in a weird spot too. And, I have a friend who is a professor, and they complain all the time about how bad students are about trying to get around things and how they're trying to get out of things. And then there's even cases where it's like, oh, this person has a disability, and it's like, all right, now are they really trying to get out of this thing because of their disability, or are they just trying to get out of doing this work? And it's like bad that they have to go there, but that's part of the job. But the argument I was going to make against, making it a little more, making it harder for the person to talk their way out of it. At least if they have to talk the way out of it, they got to do some work to get out of it. And
It's a different kind of work.
They're developing some people skills and some negotiation and things like that, which you could argue like, hey, maybe that's where I got a lot of my, sweet talking and convincing skills is from,
everybody
manipulating.
You heard it here.
Right,
Reed is
exactly.
a used car salesman.
Exactly. Well, for $5 down, you can pay $1,000 a month.
Ooh, that sounds great.
For this 92 Chevelle.
That doesn't have any tires.
500,000 miles. It's a hovercraft.
It's
It's a hovercraft.
It's just on blocks right now.
Well,
It's fine.
we thought about starting today's episode, but then we kind of put it off for a little bit.
Do you want to actually get into it?
I think we should probably get into it. Let's get into it.
Helpful for life.
Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life.
This is Ryder Richards, the procrastinator on the couch.
The progastinator.
I
He's
missed some
pro-gas.
syllables
Yeah.
in there somewhere.
Cheers to
I'm
that.
so lazy I can't even pronounce.
Putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. So, yeah, welcome. Good morning. Today is Tuesday, December 7th. Oh, we did forget our obligatory. Hold on.
Yeah, wait for it. Excuse me.
Good morning.
Morning. Go down the wrong pipe there.
December 2nd, 7th. December 7th.
Oh, man.
let's
and
try
it's
this.
2021.
Let's try this again.
Put it over on me.
Yep.
Okay, cough it out. Come on. So, yeah, it is.
Welcome
now
to What the Hell
Tuesday.
is Water. It is Tuesday, December 7th. This is episode 49. And we're in the year of 2021. And, we were just talking about yesterday, which we won't get into again because we know how that can go. But we were talking about procrastination yesterday.
So just one more point.
One more point. And then the challenge was about self-awareness. And this morning, Ryder was kind of making the connection. Is like, yeah, I think self-awareness is a really big part of recognizing, first off, that you are procrastinating in general. And then more importantly, maybe in the moment, you recognize, hey, okay, I am procrastinating right now. And then I also teased that we're going to be talking about time blocking, if not today, later this week. But a couple of topics that we are for sure going to talk about today. The first one is something called Poka-yoke, and it's actually goes hand in hand with procrastination and the discussion we were just having about systems versus people, and the whole goal of it is to make things mistake proof and design a system so that the human isn't the one at fault. And I saw a quote while I was looking things up the other day. It said, "Blame the system, not the human." And that's like,
forget that.
I know, right?
Totally blaming the human.
Right? That's funny that you said basically that same thing. And then after that, we're going to have another episode of GARR, which is Go Ask, Writer, and Read.
Yeah.
So we have a question on that one about anxiety in cooking. So that'll be a little interesting. But first, let's jump into the Poka-yoke conversation. So
can you define that for us?
I'm
Because
so
it
glad
sounds
you
like it
asked.
is not American.
It's not American. It is Japanese. So actually, I wrote down the path of how this came up. You know, I think I mentioned it to you one time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's you mentioned it to me, and then since then I feel like I've run into it 3 more times. So good timing on your part.
Do you have that kind of system where it's like, oh, if I hear something X times, then I know I should do something with it, or?
Yeah, a little bit, but the other one that is the ikigai is something that I've heard, I guess, a month ago, and now I've heard it like 2 or 3 more times, and I'm just like, I guess I need to focus on it. But sometimes the concept itself is all. Like once somebody brings it up, and I'm like, that concept is right up my alley.
Yeah, I can tell.
I'm
I can
there.
tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll put it on screen now so you can see how it's spelled. But it's Poka-yoke. It's Poka space Yoke. And I actually, had the foresight of making the joke of cracking an egg and poking
Poking the yoke.
yeah, like the U.S. president poking the yolk, and then I forgot to crack the egg. But that's neither here nor there. Maybe next time we talk
Maybe
about
next time we
Poka-yoke.
can get around to this.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a design flaw right there.
But yeah, so Ryder, I mentioned it to you once. You heard it some other spot, and then you also sent me a Seth Godin blog where he talked about it. And in that blog, which we'll share in the chat, he's looking for some types of Poka-yoke in his life, I think, or he was just kind of thinking about it, and he came up with some cool examples. So I'll share that in the chat. But I guess I'll define it real quick, and then I'll give a little bit more about how I got here. The definition is it's a Japanese term that means mistake proofing or inadvertent error prevention. And it actually is kind of cool about, I'm sure this has happened with a lot of words, but it can be very obvious with character-based languages. If you see like Poka-yoke, it comes from this one word, which I'm not going to know the full word, but poke something, and the other one is yoke something, right? And it's like if you take these 2 characters and you put them together, this one means like mistake, and this one means like prevention, and then they put them together, and it's like, oh, this is this new word. It's
mistake
like
prevention.
yeah, exactly. So that was kind of cool to see the etymology of it, fancy way of saying the word history. But it has its roots in Japanese manufacturing. And so I don't know if you've ever heard of like the Toyota production system. Does that mean anything to you?
No.
Okay. So back when I worked at Boeing, they were paying for me to get some additional education from Caltech, the University of California Polytechnic at Pasadena, I think is the full title, which was a weird thing to me about. They have like 8-10 cows or something like that, and I'm like, wait, but they all have different names. It's interesting. Anyways, so I was taking this class at Caltech, and I was working on what's called a Lean Six Sigma certificate. First a green belt, and then a black belt. And Lean Six Sigma, kind of like we were talking about with Poka-yoke, it's actually a couple of terms. So it's lean and then Six Sigma. And the term lean is about lean manufacturing, and it's talking about, okay, how do I do this thing with the least amount of waste possible. And waste could be time, waste could be material, it could be probably a handful of other things I don't remember off the top of my head. But the idea is, okay, if we're going to do this thing, we're going to make this thing, how do we do it as lean as possible? And I say manufacturing, but that's been broadened, and I certainly apply it in all ways of life. And then the other part is Six Sigma. And the term sigma refers to the statistical factor, which is called sigma, which is also known as a standard deviation. And so when you want something to be Six Sigma, basically, and I should have looked up the definition to make sure I don't mess it up, but so take this with a grain of salt. But basically, Six Sigma means that it is so far out of the statistical distribution that it's such a rarity that it's like 1 in 1 million or something like that. And so it's like we want our manufacturing to be so good that there's only a mistake or an error, 1/1,000,000th of the time, 6 standard deviations away. And so combining those two, Lean Six Sigma is basically a course and a certificate program that teaches you how to look at the world this way and how to think this way. And honestly, it's one of those things that sounds maybe to some people kind of boring, but it completely changed the way I think.
Mostly, I just want the belts.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
all
just
these
like,
colored belts. Yeah.
You're like, you said a Japanese term, now you're talking about
Yeah,
belts.
that's all I'm getting out of this.
Yeah,
This is
exactly.
like the episode on ninjas.
Crouching
or something.
Tiger.
Yeah, right.
Be as efficient as possible. Yeah. Yeah.
Just one perfect punch.
Yeah, right.
One
into the
Punch
heart.
Man. By the way, if y'all, even if you hate anime, One Punch Man's pretty good. That's a nice gateway drug.
Now, is there a sequel to One Punch Man?
I
gotta know.
Two Punch Man.
I gotta know.
No, Half Punch Man.
No Fist Man?
Yeah,
is
right.
gone? Just
One
walking
Kick
around
Man.
with
It's just Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lean Six Sigma. So that's the class I was taking, and what companies will do is they'll have people go get these belts, and they'll then go do projects at their companies to apply their learnings to help the company run more efficiently, better, save money, do things faster, all those types of things. So I took this class, and within that class, I learned about the concept of Poka-yoke, and it's from a Japanese manufacturing technique. And so back in the day, Toyota has been hailed for decades on how good their manufacturing system was, and that has been now held up as a model that's been taught across the world. And in case you're not aware, Toyota manufactures cars. They're a Japanese-based company, and now their North American headquarters are actually in Plano, which is just down the road from here. So we need to go get a tour there. I think that would be really
would be
cool.
fun.
Yeah. I've been saying I want to do that for a while, and now I have an even better excuse. Anyways, so the Japanese technique, it had all these various things to help make the manufacturing better, more lean, and help towards Six Sigma, and be more efficient. And another concept that you might have heard of that has come from that is called just in time, which actually, for those of you in America, if there was ever a year to have heard about it, it was probably these last 2 years, because just in time is the idea that when you're making something, you're making, say, a car, for example, instead of having a warehouse of all these parts just sitting at your facility, because that actually costs money, because you got to front those parts up front. You got to pay for this place to store it. You got to do all the administrative work to maintain it and all that kind of stuff. Well, instead of having that giant warehouse, you have a smaller warehouse, and you just get the things in. You just get the supply in just in time before you start manufacturing that thing. And so that way it allows you to be a lot more responsive when it's like, oh, there's a global pandemic and demand went down to this. Well, now we don't have a big pile of stuff that's sitting here and is just going to wait and waste money. However, the downside of that is when something like COVID came in, it interrupted all the supply chains. And so all of these things that we depended on, whether it's toilet paper or shoes or food or whatever, I don't know, computer chips, yeah, all of these things that went out of stock. Well, that's because they didn't have the things they needed to make the thing, right? And then even when they did have the finished product, there weren't enough trucks and boats and trains to transport the goods to get to the stores or to get to our house, right? And so that's the downside of just-in-time manufacturing, is that. But obviously, that's a rarity.
Yeah, there's a balance in there somewhere. But it's pretty interesting to kind of think about it. And of course, COVID made us think about all these things way more than we ever have before. But when we're talking about Poka-yoke, there's this kind of it's this idea, I think, that you could build components that are going to like fit together perfectly. So that my easiest example for it is kind of like a USB-C plug. It just goes in one way. There's no flipping around. There's nothing else. But maybe that's a bad one. Maybe it would be better if you had like crazier options and there was just no way to ever screw it up. So a lot of the design work should be around taking out the decision making for you. So
Right.
you can't inverse positive negative. You can't just plug two wires into something and get it wrong and then fry your components. You make a design system that will not allow you to fry your components.
Correct. Yeah. The whole goal is to prevent the human from being able to make the mistake. And in the case of the Toyota manufacturing system, that was another cool word that they they invented was autonomate or something like that. And it was a combination of automation and human. And that's what they said is like we combine the human element with the automation element, the computer, the machine, and it's like we want to apply the human to the machine.
Yeah.
And it was like really cool to be reading some of that stuff because it's like it's so relevant today, right? In the day of AI and the fear of computers replacing all our jobs and things like that. Well, this was back in the 60s when the car manufacturing was ramping up. They were doing larger volume, getting more efficient, shipping things all across the world. So it was a really cool parallel to hear about. But yeah, so it's talking about how do you design something so it can't be messed up. And it actually, you sent me that blog a few weeks ago, and then yesterday, our guest on Friday, Hunter Hodnett, he sent me a tweet, and he was like, oh, here's this other podcast that I was interviewed for. You might want to check it out. The way they do some stuff you might like. And so I looked at it, and one of their clips they had was a guy talking about, hey. And I'd heard this thing before, but not in this context specifically. It's like, all right, if the podcast is about people who are trying to give a pitch and they're trying to get money. And he's like, all right, well, when you want something, if you ask for it more specifically, it makes it easier for people to help you. Mm-hmm. And in the case of this, he was like, instead of saying, hey, I want you investors to connect me with colleges. If you say, hey, I want to be connected with professors at Brown, Harvard, and MIT. Well, that's a lot easier problem for them to help you with than just saying, oh, colleges, right? And so it was like, oh, be specific. And so then I started writing down some quotes that it made me think of, which I don't know if I was making them up or I heard them elsewhere or whatnot. But the best way to get what you want is to ask for it specifically, which then changed it to the best way to get what you want is to make it easy for people to give it to you. Mm. And then if you want something done, make it easy to be done. If you want someone to do something right, make it easy for them to do it right. And then lastly, if you want something done right, make it impossible for them to do wrong. And after I wrote that, I was like, okay, I got to talk about Poka-yoke because I was like, that was the transition. And I had just finished talking with somebody else about them doing something for me. And I was like, can you just do it the right way? And I was like, well, if I just make it impossible for them to do it wrong, then it'll be good. And Poka-yoke.
Yeah, this is funny because you're bringing up the term easy in some of those quotes. And I was like, that's kind of a fascinating concept because, I mean, once you've done something enough times, it can be easy, even if other people would consider it the difficult way. So I was just thinking to myself, we got to get the easy out of there. And then you did it on the last one, you know, make it impossible to do wrong. And it's just kind of like, now there are things I could kind of push back against that, which is based off of a book that I've been reading, but it talks about certain tools having what they call affordances. And this is just the way that you would use the tool because it allows you certain things. So say, for instance, a couch allows you quite easily. It's like it's shaped for you to sit on it. So it's offering you an affordance. You can also stand on it, though. That's an affordance as well. And so it affords you certain opportunities to use the tool the way that you see fit. So, for instance, if I've got, I don't know, a drill gun and I need a hammer, I can flip the drill gun around and use it as a hammer. That's probably not the way it's meant to be used, but it has afforded me this opportunity. So one of the things I think about with tools a lot is if they have one use, developing just for that one use so that it can't be misused. And that's one of the things I think that gets us back into this Poka-yoke idea is that you want the tool to be impossible to use incorrectly so that not only do people not damage themselves, but they don't damage the tool.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that it's not always a tool. It can also be a system, right? And when we're talking in abstract terms, some people may roll their eyes or not really get it. So I want to talk about a couple of examples. Well, first off, I like it. I like Poka-yoke. And in my mind, it's like, okay, if there's a way to make life easier for others and reduce the chance of them, doing something wrong, why would we not want to do more of that, right? It seems like just such a good thing. And it's like, especially when you're in a position where it's like, I'm designing a product or a service or a thing that a lot of people are going to interact with. If I can design it where they can't do it wrong, then I'm going to touch all of those lives and all of those little, I actually like to think of them as aggressors, right? Like kind of like we were talking about, oh, you bumped your arm on something the other day. Well, the more of those that happen in a day, it wears on you, right? So same kind of thing. When you run into bad design where you can do things wrong, like it makes you frustrated. And so you mentioned a pretty famous example of horrible Poka-yoke, which is what's called the USB-A plug, which is the one that looks kind of like a rectangle, and it's got the white piece on one side and nothing on the other. And you got to put it in. If it doesn't work, you got to flip it over and put it in. And I've heard a quote from that guy. He's like, if I had realized just how wide this thing was going to spread and how long we'd use, we never would have done that. But you know why they didn't do it? Because it cost a little bit more money and it made manufacturing a little more difficult.
Yeah.
And so now we've been stuck with that for, I don't know, 30 years or whatever it's been now.
Yeah, and we have the technology. We could create something different, but this one just has a foothold.
And it's a standard, right?
Yeah.
And so now there's a new one that's come out called USB-C, which does allow you to flip either way. But it has its own problems, which the USB-C cable can be different based on what it is and what its purpose is. Sometimes it only does power. Sometimes it only does data. Sometimes it can do those things, but only up to a certain limit. Now they've gone another way and allowed, so now you can't mess up the hardware connection, but there's so many other things that are arguably much harder to know. And I, as an electrical engineer, I still struggle with all of the small technical details, but yet this is something they've created for the masses, for the layperson. And I'm like, this is horrible design. Horrible design. Yeah. So it's like, you guys had a chance to fix it and you messed it up.
Yeah, you could have fixed every... Yeah, if you had a list of things you wanted, is like no longer having to guess about this.
Yeah.
And then you just invent more reasons to guess about it. It does make you start thinking there's like a conspiracy of engineers against the layman.
Yes, for sure. So let's go through a couple of more examples. So a good example is an ATM. So an ATM, when you cannot get your money until you get your card out. And no, it didn't used to always be that way.
But you could leave your card in there and walk off, but now they spit the card out. Until you pull the card out, it does not deliver your cash to you.
Right. So that's a great example of everyday Poka-yoke. And then actually I searched my email to see if I had anything from the class, and actually it was like he had shared some other professor's page on it, and it had errored because the guy had been so long. I had to go to Internet Archive to find. But in case you didn't know, guys, if you ever go to a website that you can't find, it's no longer there. If you type in the Internet Wayback Machine or you go to archive.org, you can paste in the link and you can see snapshots of that page as history goes back. So this page actually I had to go back to 2015 in order to find. But one of the examples of good Poka-yoke was a floppy disk.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who don't know, it's like before flash drives. I don't even know if kids know what flash drives are these days. Everything's wireless. But anyways, a floppy disk, you could only put in one way. Otherwise, you had to flip it over and put it in. One that I really liked is talking about the fueling area of a car. So you open up the little door, right? So that is, then you have the little thing that you unscrew. Well, when you screw it on, it clicks, so you know that it's tight, right? So that's one example of Poka-yoke. It's tethered to the car, so you don't drive off without your cap.
Yeah, right.
That's another form of Poka-yoke. And then another one is the size of that hole is actually different for unleaded versus diesel versus other various types. That because the nozzle is different, so that way you can't
put the diesel into your unleaded vehicle. Yeah.
Right. Now, don't hold me on that, on exactly which one's which, right? But I thought that was pretty cool.
I do know that my dad put unleaded into his diesel truck the other day on accident.
Nice.
And he was just like, he realized it right after he did it and was like, oops. So he just called somebody and they came and just like
drained it or
towed
whatever.
it off.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's one way it works, but not the other.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The more likely error is diesel into unleaded, probably. So they protected against that. And then I could keep going on, but one other example is the anti-lock braking system, right? When you're in a wreck and you slam on your brake, that's actually, as far as getting traction and stopping, you don't want your brake to just be continually applied. It does not stop you as well.
Yeah.
So it actually, what the anti-lock braking system does is it goes chop, 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 chop. And even though your foot is firmly applied, it incrementally applies it to help you stop faster.
Yeah.
And so that's another example of Poka-yoke. But I mentioned, it doesn't always have to be a thing. It could also be a system. And so real quick, I wanted to say the example he gave, or the one that started it all in the original system, was people were assembling a switch, and it needed to have these springs in it, and people were forgetting to put the springs in. So what he did was he separated the process into 2 steps. Instead of assemble the switch, it was, okay, grab these 2 springs and put them in these 2 holes.
Yeah.
Then the second step is grab that switch, put the springs into the hole, and then it moves on. And if the switch moves on and you still got springs, then oh, I forgot one.
Yeah.
Because that's another part about Poka-yoke is, hey, recognize the problem as soon as possible, because the further it goes down the line, the more errors may be piled on, and harder may be to find, all that kind of stuff. So that was the example of when he did. And then another example, that's not a product or service or thing or whatever, that I like to apply Poka-yoke to is my communication with people. And this is especially if I have a task I need to get done, or I have a question that I need answered. I've gotten very good at writing very specific emails and very specific chat questions, and to the point where it has bullet points and numbers and bolding text and all this type of stuff. And someone might look at it and roll their eyes, be like, wow, that's way overkill. And it's like, well, guess what? Now I've saved 4 hours of back and forth and and confusion, or them doing the thing wrong and then having to come back. It's like, oh, I'm overly specifying. Here's this thing. And then I sit there and I think, okay, what are they going to have questions about? Then I go ahead and answer what those questions are about. What are the things they could run into? Hey, if you run into this, ask this person, or go look this thing up, or here's how I would do it. And so again, a big thing about Poka-yoke is I like that, how sometimes they say, think of future read, think of future writer. Same kind of thing. Like, how do I design this to where it's going to be good for future read and future writer?
No, that's a great one. I like the communication aspect, especially when it comes to email, because I do find that people don't want to read their emails. They skim them. And so setting up kind of a formatted structure that has steps 1, 2, 3, 4 on there, and then has a FAQ on it and everything else, it's kind of like, in a weird way, we designed our email like a web page that's delivering some info to us. I like that idea. I've done it a few times, and I find that it definitely gets more results than me putting it into prose form, because when I just put it all into a paragraph form, people just don't read it.
For sure. All right, so last couple of things on Poka-yoke, then we'll move on. I just wanted to read a couple of things off of Seth's blog, just so we could have
and by the way,
sort of examples.
Seth Godin is an author, marketer. He's got a daily blog that I enjoy. I don't read it every day, but I get the emails every day, and he's got a lot of insights. He's been doing it for years at this point, and anyway, really great guy if you need to look him up and follow him.
Yeah, one of probably his flagship book, but I could be wrong, is called The Purple Cow.
Yes.
And it's about marketing, and it's like, if you want your thing to stand out, design a purple cow, because people are going to talk about a purple cow. They're not going to talk about a brown cow or black cow or white cow.
Yeah, this idea that the marketing of a purple cow was so popular that at some point school kids went to a dairy and they actually thought they were purple cows because it was always on their milk boxes.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So in his blog post, which I've shared in the chat, is called In Search of Poka-yokes. He says, you can't run the microwave with the door open, which is probably a good thing. You can't start driving your car without putting your foot on the brake first. He said that's because people who weren't paying attention were slamming their Audis into the walls of their garage. So people at Audi, designed that one in.
Nice.
And then another example is handing the keys over to your partner when you go to a party and you're about to start drinking. It's like, all right, I'm going to think of future read. I'm going to be drinking right now. I don't want to be driving. I don't want to put myself to have to make that decision later. I'll decide in advance and then pass over the keys. So that was one of my favorite examples of his. So that's Poka-yoke for you. Do you have any thoughts or questions on it? Or?
I have a buddy named Peter Chazinski who has been practicing this for years, and I think he wouldn't mind me mentioning his name on the show. But he's been designing products for a long time for various things. So AV, audio, video stuff, this, that, and the other. But he always makes sure to use different plugs, and each plug has a different color and a different code and a different cable. And he just does all this because it makes it easier, but it's also just part of a better process. So
Right.
does it take him more time up front? Yes, it does. But at the same time, you're never going to have somebody like plugging the audio into a video port or something like that. And it's simply by using alternate plugs. And so he's been doing this for years at this point, and I've always thought it's just a brilliant idea of kind of somebody being thoughtful about the end user.
Yeah, and so I'm going to share a couple of videos just on YouTube of some examples of Poka-yoke, and one of them is it's like a basic example where it's, you know, some people will be like, oh, it might be a little bit of overkill, but the point of it is just to see the idea of how simple it can be for you to do Poka-yoke. And the first one is it's a workstation, and they're trying to get people to put stuff back where it goes. It's like, oh, this pen should be going over here, but people are putting it in this place because there's a hole, so they could put it. And so the fix was tape over the hole. So they don't have a spot to put it. They have to look for the spot where it goes. Yeah. And the other example is a ruler. They're hanging it by this hole instead of this hole. Again, like small detail, but what do? Tape over the hole so they can't put that one on there. And another thing he did was he colored it to add contrast to make it easier to find and see where that was supposed to go. And so the point of that isn't, wow, look at that workstation, it's so well set up, but believe it or not, that's extremely important in a manufacturing environment. I mean, for example, when I worked at Boeing, you're literally sending things into space, and there's something called FOD, foreign object debris, which is where tools, pieces, trash, random things end up in the satellite that then go into space and then kind of shake around and can potentially cause problems. And you can't send a maintenance guy to space. So there's a reason why some of these things have to be very, very tightly controlled. And then the other example is a little more advanced, and it's at like an electronics manufacturing place. And it is like a system where it's like, all right, he grabs the box. The box hits like a little thing that tells the system, oh, he grabbed one of those boxes. Then it opens up. Here's where the nuts are. And he sticks his hand in it. As he pulls it out, he hits a thing and that says, all right, he's grabbed those. And then it goes to the next thing. A door opens, and he just keeps going until it goes each one. It's like, all right, you can't mess that up. You grab this, you grab that, and then you move on to the next one, and he starts it over again. And so I just wanted to make sure to highlight a couple of the examples of like on the far end, if you want to like really design it, get electronics involved, all that kind of stuff, you can. But on the low end, it can be literally as simple as doing some tape or doing a marker. It doesn't take much. So I encourage you guys at home to think about one way you can apply Poka-yoke in your life today. And I especially encourage you to think about this. If you're the type of person who is noticing things in your family or your significant other are always doing wrong, I know I am. You know, I'm really good at that. Well, try and figure out a system to where they can't do it wrong. And maybe this is, hey, you know, kids aren't putting their shoes on or they lose them or what. Okay, well, let's design a spot where they always have their shoes. They always take their shoes off. And that's the last step they do when they leave the house. It's the first step they do whenever they get home. You know, having a place for, you know, that's just one example of one way you can say, you cannot do this wrong. Like now we're building the system to build that habit to where you're always doing it right.
Yeah, no, and I think the system idea is great for all that.
Cool. Well, the last thing we're going to talk about today is, wait for it. Ready?
Oh, man.
3, 2, 1.
GARR! Arr, me days.
Go ask, writer, and read. GARR. Welcome to GARR. You know,
GARR.
This is the segment where you guys can ask us questions to writer and to read.
Yeah, we'll probably respond. Probably not with what you want.
Probably.
But yeah, there will be a response.
So today we have a GARR, and it's actually, you know, the other day we started tweeting a little bit from our account, which is like kind of a first for me. And I looked and I was like, oh, I've got some notifications. I should probably see what those are. And one of them was from my business coach, who actually he mentioned me in a comment. He's like, oh, someone asked this thing, and he added me. And I was like, hey, cool, thanks, man. A few weeks ago, I was like, oh, I probably should be checking this thing more often if I'm going to do this whole tweets to book thing. And so I looked, and it was a tweet from, I'm guessing a friend or friend of a friend or internet friend, who knows these days, right? But the tweet said, I can't cook. I don't cook. It gives me horrible anxiety, but I'd really like to change this. I'm just not really sure of the first step. And that was Kat who wrote in. So before I respond, what are your thoughts on that one, Ryder?
Well, first, I feel bad for you.
Yeah.
Like, that sucks.
Yeah, it
I
does.
mean, it sucks having anxiety, and that kind of makes me wonder, like, I'm just thinking, like, traumatic events, like the first time you tried to make a sandwich and then, like, it fell on the floor and then the dog
Final
did something.
Destination happened,
Yeah,
yeah.
all these horrible, like, I'm just like, oh, what kind of awful thing has happened to give you anxiety in the kitchen? But beyond that, I don't know, Reed. Like, I don't spend all that much time in the kitchen. I'm one of those people that could eat sandwiches every day and just never be bothered about it. I just go in there, do my thing, and I move on. So I just don't think about it that much. I also don't really prepare fine dishes or fine meals. And I used to cook quite a bit, used to bake, used to do things like that. And now I just don't spend time on it. So I don't know, like how do you sort of get up the gumption to get back into the kitchen? Do you do baby steps? Do you start with a sandwich and then work your way back in?
Yeah. So I think there's kind of two ways I wanted to talk about this. One was talking about some ways to reduce anxiety in the kitchen, and then the other one is just some approaches to how you can kind of get started cooking, right? Keeping that anxiety thing in mind. So the first thing about reducing anxiety in the kitchen or really anywhere, one technique that helps a lot is for people to think things through, to plan things out, see how it's going to go, and possibly even there's an exercise you can do called failure tripping, which is where all right, let me envision what's going to happen and let me see what the worst thing that's going to happen is. So that way I can know it's a possibility and see what's going to happen. And with cooking, like, realistically speaking, in 99.99% of the cases, the worst case is I'm going to have to throw some food out. If you really have some kind of craziness going on and you happen to like start a fire, it could get unsafe, all that type of stuff. But that's very, very low chance of happening, especially if you've got a fire extinguisher. So, thinking these things through, and that could be your action, right? Like, you're sitting there, you're doing that failure tripping, and you're like, okay, well, the worst thing that could happen is I could start a fire. Okay, let me have the fire extinguisher handy. I know where it is. I'm not trying to look for it in the middle of all the craziness. No. And there you go. And oh, by the way, there are other ways you can put out kitchen fires. One of them is just smothering it. That's a big common thing is you open the oven and it's all flaming. Like,
Is that? Yes. This is how you react to fire.
When in reality,
like Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah. The best answer is you open the oven. You see fire, and you go, ah. And then you close the oven.
That's it.
And that's it.
Yeah.
You close the oven because fire needs oxygen to burn, and so if you close the door, you'll limit the amount of oxygen, and it'll be smothered. Or if you have like a pan on your stove that catches fire, you can grab like a sheet pan and you can put it on top to again smother it. You can, and this one's there are some other ways to do that I'm not gonna mention right now because they could be confused. So in the form of Poka-yoke, but we have some videos on that specifically in Kickstart Your Kitchen. So prepare, plan, and think things through. So what are some ways you do that within the kitchen? Well, one of them is meal planning. And so some place that people get anxiety around is, okay, what am I going to eat? What are the meals I'm going to do? And then you sit down and you're probably already hangry. It's 8 o'clock. You got off work late. Your feet hurt. You got a bad haircut because you don't know how to speak Spanish. And then you're like, all I've got is this lame sandwich again.
Yeah. Or haircut, whatever. Yeah.
Or haircut. Yeah.
But I don't know. There's nothing wrong with having a lame sandwich. I think that it gets weird, though. Like, I'm just curious about the gateway drug. Like, what if you're making your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and the next week you step it up and you make a club?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's the thing. And for me, it was really kind of a shift. And I don't want to take away from people who... So at the end of the day, food is required for nourishment to keep this, meat sack running, right? Food,
the old
keeping the meat
sack
sack running. Yeah. So, that's required. So at the very least, you need sustenance to keep yourself going, right?
Yeah.
But for me, there was a shift when you start having good food, and then it's kind of hard for you to go back. And there's that, it grinds at you a little bit every time you have a meal that is just not that great. And you look at food as a thing of enjoyment, a thing you can take pride in, a thing that you almost you can have as a hobby, both the eating of it and the cooking of it.
Do you think this is what causes the anxiety, though? Like, does this add to the anxiety? Is all the great potentials that could be in like having this fantastic meal and knowing that you're never going to achieve them. And so you're just like, oh, maybe I just should go back to McDonald's.
Maybe. And I looked through kind of some of the comments that she had, and she had replied to some of those comments and things like that. And in Kat's particular case, it sounded like she was struggling from kind of overwhelm and also just that whole, needing to take that first step. But yeah, that's the beauty of anxiety. There's all types of ways that you can do it. And if you guys at home have specific areas that you'd like for me to address on that, please write in. That's why we have this whole GARR section, and also we can comment and respond offline as well. But yeah, so as you're planning, so meal planning is one thing you can do to get out the, at least, if not the entire week, at least a couple days, like, all right, hey, here's the meals I'm going to make. And then the next step naturally is, all right, here's the things I need from the grocery store to make them. And then you go to the grocery store and you get them. And then before you start cooking, there's a really important concept called mise en place. And that's a French word, and it's spelled M-I-S-E space E-N space P-L-A-C-E. Looks like place, mise en place. And it's a French word that means essentially everything in its place. And so the concept with mise en place is you kind of like Poka-yoke, you set all of the things up that you know you're going to need in advance, so they're right there when you need them. And this can be especially important for certain techniques or certain types of cooking where it's like, all right, do this for 30 seconds and then add this. And it's like, well, if you don't have that thing there ready to go, you're going to experience stress and anxiety where it's like, oh, I'm hurrying over to the kitchen and I'm trying to get this thing out. And I'm trying to do it all before it burns, right?
Yeah.
But that's why if you ever watch like a cooking show or something like that, you'll see they have all these little bowls with all their ingredients. And a lot of times they'll have a tray where it's like, all right, now I'm moving on to the main course. And they'll grab the whole tray and it's got, oh, here's the meat, here's the spices, here's the sides, the vegetables, and so that mise en place is a really important concept that can help you. It's like, all right, so read through what it is you're going to cook, grab the tools you need, grab the ingredients you need, get them all out, get them in a spot so where you can easily access them. So mise en place is another great way to help reduce anxiety. Going through that plan before you're actually doing it, so reading through the recipe, if there's a video, watching the recipe. And this one is a very, very important. Be okay with failure. Be okay with failure. That's the beauty of cooking, especially if you're starting from scratch with nothing. Guess what? If you're trying today, that's more than you were doing yesterday, right? And so worst case, you have to throw away a little bit of food. Okay, so you're out a couple bucks or whatever. But guess what? What are you going to do now? Now you're just going to buy some food like you would otherwise. So it's not that big of a deal.
It's not a tremendous loss for you. There's something really nice about this. Not to create too much anxiety that you need to set up multiple systems, of course, because that might be the very thing that's keeping you out of the kitchen. But there is something nice about kind of getting education about this topic. I think you brought up Kickstart Your Kitchen before, but there seems to be a reduction in anxiety the more you know about something. So
For sure.
The more techniques you can practice, the more things you have in your head, the more you understand how all these little things work. I find that that's a tremendous reducer of anxiety. So like before I do something crazy, like try to install an air conditioner, I watch about 30 videos on how to do it. I start going into forums, I start digging around, and then I feel less and less anxious the more information I encounter.
For sure. And so that is a very good point, right? Learning about it, knowing how it's going to happen, things that could go wrong, things like that. And that's the beauty of what we did with Kickstart Your Kitchen was we designed the course and each of the individual lessons with that lens in mind. Okay, as you're doing this, what could go wrong? Then what do you do? So another bonus, which, depending on your source of anxiety, could help or hurt, is to clean as you go, because I know that's a big thing for people as they're like, oh, I don't cook because I don't want to have to clean up. But if you clean as you go, okay, this thing's simmering. All right, now let me go clean up that prep thing. All right, now I just put this thing in. It's got to sit there for a few minutes. Let me go clean up the counter. Doing those things as you clean as you go, it helps, reduce the anxiety and stress of having all this mess all around you and, the counter being dirty, all that kind of stuff. So that's another tip for you. And then one that I really like is multiplying that positive impact. Because right now, in your mind, like there's this huge cost, right? It's like, oh, cooking's going to suck. All these things are going to suck, and fire's going to rain from the sky. And then be like, and then I'll be sitting there, and I'll be looking up at the sky, and I'll be like, ah!
Yeah, that's
And then I'll be looking at the oven, I'll be like, ah!
The fire thing.
and it's just everywhere.
Just
but
lots of screaming.
So yeah, the cost, right?
So if you live in an apartment, you probably shouldn't be cooking.
That's the takeaway. I'm glad you grabbed that one out.
Thanks.
Hashtag sarcasm. So multiply that positive impact. So that way you feel better and you get more out of the act of cooking, right? And so one way you do that is by first off, you can plate the food you're eating well. Like if you just make something and you kind of all slap it on a plate, well, if you take a little bit more time and you think about the presentation and you kind of try and make it look nicer and fancier, then it can like make you feel better and it make you be proud of it and maybe even take a picture. And especially if you're either serving somebody live or maybe you take a picture and share it with somebody later and be like, hey, look at what I did. All of those things can be very valuable and they can help you get a lot more positive things out of the cooking. So then your benefit is much more than that theoretical cost that you're picturing in your head, right? And another one is just to eat it more than once, right? So you have leftovers. So if you cook something and you make it successfully, that's great. And it tastes good, great. Well, then you can have it again another time too. And it's like, oh, well, now I'm getting multiple positive things out of this one thing that I did, right? And then I wanted to mention so with Kickstart Your Kitchen, we have 5 milestones as we're teaching it. And this wasn't necessarily done intentionally, but it actually worked out kind of nicely where the 5 milestones, they actually apply overall for like your cooking journey, but it's also kind of like a cycle where every time you're cooking, you can apply them. And those milestones are prep your setup, so get everything ready to go. The next one is plan and shop, like we were just talking about. The third one is cook your food. And then the fourth one is clean up and storage, right? And so that is what you're doing every single time you cook. And the way the course is laid out, it teaches you about each step of those within those milestones, so you know how to do them all to help reduce your anxiety. And if you ever have any questions, you can also ask. So that's the benefit of doing Kickstart Your Kitchen to help you figure these things out. And then lastly, I wanted to talk about a couple of approaches to cooking in general you can take if you're trying to get started for the first time. Well, one of them I think you mentioned earlier is starting
Peanut
simple.
butter and jelly.
Yeah, peanut butter and jelly. I like it. No, that's actually kind of related to the second one. But the first one is starting simple, right? And also figuring out something that you can make that is going to minimize your chance of error. Poka-yoke, which is actually points to a great thing to try, which is eggs. And another benefit of eggs is they're very inexpensive. You buy a dozen eggs or 18 eggs for like $3 or something like that, give or take a little bit. Well, that means one egg costs, I don't know, 10, 20 cents. I'm not doing the math in my head, but it's not much. Enough to where like you can cook it, and if you mess it up, okay, throw it away. Feed it to the dog, put it in your compost pile, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, the only thing you can really do wrong there is burn it, right?
Right.
It really only goes in one direction. So it is kind of like, just be prepared to burn the first 2 or 3. And then you'll be fine after that.
Yeah,
you start getting a feel for it.
And if you do like come out undercooked, like you can put it back on, right, and keep cooking it some more. And be like, oh, whoop, that was early, and maybe it turns out that wasn't great, and you end up throwing that one away too. But that's the nice thing about doing something simple like eggs, which is also inexpensive, because then you don't feel bad about if it messes up or things like that. And then you can also, the beauty of an egg is you can start simple, but an egg can be prepared so many different ways, and we actually have multiple videos on the course that actually highlight each one of those ways and give a bunch of tips on, okay, here's how to do this right, here are the things you're looking for, things like that. Then the other approach is picking a single dish or meal and cooking it multiple times, so that way it stays in that area of comfort. You're using that as your way to kind of grow your cooking knowledge and your confidence. And then it's like, all right, so I one of my favorite examples is actually one that when my brother and I went to South America, we part of that trip, we went to Bolivia, and we were traveling through Bolivia on a 5-day journey, and we were in like a Land Cruiser, like a car. It was me, my brother, and one other guy. And then there were 2 other Land Cruisers, so there were like 10 or so of us. And we all caravaned together, and we would go through like this desert. You see all these mountains, see these lakes. We saw flamingos. We saw alpaca. We saw llamas. We saw this other small llama cousin, I think starts with a C. I can't remember the name of. We saw these different colored lakes. We saw snow and frozen lakes. Chupacabra. Those came to us at night, with the mythical creature. But yeah, we saw all this really cool stuff. And then But one of the reason I brought it up was because one of the guys on that trip, he lived in Miami, but he was a French guy and he was a chef. And so I was like, oh, this is fun, you know. And he was so great. He taught me all sorts of French cuss words, you know. Thank you.
Thank you. First words you learn in any language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he was just such a character. He was a lot of fun to be around. But we were talking with him about cooking, and he said one of his favorite things to do is to pick a dish and start really basic. And so I think the example he used, which I think is a great one, is spaghetti. And you start out, just get a box of dried spaghetti, a jar of pasta sauce, and then if you want to, you know, a pound of the cheap ground beef that comes in a tube. And then you cook that. And then the next time you cook it, just pick one thing and improve it a little bit. Okay, well, so now this time, maybe I'll, instead of using the cheap ground beef, I'm going to get a little bit nicer meat. And then I'll prepare that, and that'll kind of amp up the flavor. And then the next time, I'll still do that meat thing, but then I'm going to take that jar sauce and I'm going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to cook some garlic in the pan, cook some onion. Maybe I'll add some fresh herbs. Then I've got a nicer sauce. Well, then the next time, maybe I'll make the sauce from scratch, which is basically what I just said, but you just add in some tomatoes, right? And then then you have a homemade sauce and you got some good meat. Oh, well, now maybe I'll make homemade noodles, or I'll buy fresh noodles, or I'll just buy a nicer brand of dried noodles. And then next thing you know, after you've done this, this could be over a week, over months, over years. Now you have, your special spaghetti that you can create and you can share with people. And it now has been customized to the things you like as well. Like, oh, maybe I like it a little spicier. Maybe I like it a little sweeter. Maybe I like a lot of meat. Maybe I'd like just a little. That's the beauty of cooking at home, is you can customize all of those things. And you're reducing the anxiety because you're still staying within that kind of comfortable bounds of, I'm making the same thing. And hey, I've now made this multiple times, but I'm just slightly tweaking it, slightly improving it.
No, I think I would bring that back to art. We talked a little bit about it last time, but it's talking about just gradually progressing. And you were asking at one point, like, when you know you're finished with something. That's a huge question, but it could also be the same with your spaghetti. There might be a point where you're cruising along and it just gets a little bit better every time. And eventually you're just like, this is perfect.
Right.
You're just like, okay. Nailed it. Finally.
And if you're like, okay, maybe I'll shave some truffles on top and sprinkle some caviar. Maybe you're going a little too far.
Too far.
Maybe a little too
it's
far.
It's no longer spaghetti at that point.
Yeah.
It's turned into something else.
Yeah. And so to bring it back to your peanut butter and jelly, like you joked about that, but that's also an area where you just, all right, you're going to make PB&Js. Well, okay, maybe next time, instead of buying, the cheapest white bread I can find, maybe I buy a little nicer bread. And maybe I buy, instead of just the regular, mass-produced peanut butter, maybe I buy one that's a little more artisanal and crafted and has extra flavors. And maybe is that a hint of cinnamon? Oh, maybe it's a little bit crunchier, so it adds a little bit of texture and depth to the sandwich. Oh, and maybe I toast the bread, or maybe I don't. And maybe I end up making the bread from scratch, making the peanut butter from scratch, making the jam from scratch. All those things you could do, right? Which is, you may seem or sound silly, but if you're just going to make that sandwich, well, if you buy a nicer jam, a nicer jelly, and a nicer bread, you're still having a PB&J, but it's just going to be that much better of an experience. And, the big shift for me with food is I look forward to it. I look forward to eating, and I enjoy the process, and I enjoy seeing the thing and also kind of judging the thing. Be like, oh, this is good. Next time I'm going to switch this a little bit or whatnot. But exactly how you enjoy it can be different for other people. But as we're sitting here talking about this fancy PB&J, I'm like, oh, it actually kind of sounds fun to try out and see. Yeah. And then also, now that I've gone to that place where I do enjoy cooking, I have some friends who've done the Soylent thing, where it's just like a meal in a bottle. And I'm like, okay, I mean, I get it. Like if you're at work and you're like crazy busy and that's literally all you got, but that's actually one thing I look forward through during the day and can, helps me get through work or whatever. It's like, all right, I know at lunch, I'm going to have something good to eat and I'm really going to enjoy it. And it puts a smile on my face.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good component. It's one of the things that we've talked about, optimization and productivity in the past. And yes, you can optimize your entire life and just drink the rest of your meals out of a shake. But you're missing out on something pretty amazing there, which, and this is part of it, is if you can move past that anxiety, get in there and figure out some way to play around and make something great, then it can just enrich your life a little bit further. So, I would actually kind of compare it to something like dancing. I usually get really nervous about dancing because I kind of suck at it. It's like there's a disconnect between my hips and the rest of my body, and they just do whatever they want.
They don't lie.
Yeah. No, they don't. But yeah, I think it's kind of one of those things where I enjoy dancing, And if I could get better at it, I would do it more often and I'd enjoy my life more. So there just starts to become this kind of like chain of enjoyment and life enjoyment. And so, the kitchen and food preparation can definitely be one of those.
Yeah, and since we're talking about dancing, we can't not plug our interview with Cheneret, which has not been published yet, but as of this live show. But I want to mention it here in case you're watching it in the past, so you can get to the link of where we do talk about that. Should be coming out sometime within the next week or so, probably. But yeah, the idea with cooking of it's a skill. And it's easy to, anytime you're doing something and you're bad at it, it's natural to not enjoy it, to not feel good, to feel that less than type of attitude. But guess what? You just got to push through it, right? There's a little bit of friction, a little bit of uncomfortableness, but then once you push through that and you keep going, you keep trying, like that's how you get better. And cooking, is an amazing thing because guess what? We all need to eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can be someone who changes how even just yourself looks at food and how you cook food, how you eat food, that's amazing. But the beauty of cooking is it's so easy for you to rub off on others. And you have somebody over and they're like, wow, what is that?
My food off.
Yeah, exactly.
Come here.
Exactly. and as you're sharing that and as other people are trying your food and it's like, wow, this is actually pretty good. How'd you make this, right? And oh, by the way, cooking can be something you do with a friend and you can learn with somebody else. And that's a great way to do it and to be doing it more. Is like, hey, cooking kind of makes me anxious but I want to start doing it more. Well, hey, Susie, why don't you come over on Wednesdays and every other Wednesday we'll cook dinner together. And now you're hanging out with a friend, you're learning a new skill, you're getting better, you're eating food which tastes better, which, oh, by the way, might lead you to eating tastier food overall because once you make good food at home, and then you go to a restaurant where it's just mediocre, you're like, okay, I'm not going to go to this mediocre restaurant anymore. And now I'm going to go and find the restaurants that can still be affordable, by the way, but just have better food. And that's the thing for me about food is like, once you start having good food and you know what it can be, you're like, all right, I'm going to start seeking that out a little bit more. So I mean, obviously I really like cooking a lot, and I couldn't not share the link because this is the whole purpose of the course. Kickstart Your Kitchen. You can go to kickstartyourkitchen.com. Which I've also shared in the chat, and that's where you can go and you can learn to revolutionize your cooking game in as little as a weekend. So it's got the course laid out in these 5 milestones that I talked about, which some of you are like, oh, I only counted 4. Well, there's 4 and a change,
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
It's 4.5.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can go there and you can. It's a collection of online videos, so you can do it at your own pace. It keeps track of which ones you watch. You can watch all of them. You can kind of cherry pick certain ones, and you can learn how to cook. And even if you've been cooking for years or decades even, there's stuff in there that will probably change the way you look at food and the way you cook. And oh, by the way, we don't just talk about cooking, we talk about the entire process. You hear me talking about nerding out about Poka-yoke and the thinking about the entire process and how people are going to do things. Well, we applied that to Kickstart Your Kitchen, and we recognize, hey, cooking, like the actual cooking, that's just one part of what happens in the kitchen. And it happens way before with your equipment and your setup and how you lay things out, how you get your mise en place, how you shop, how do you know that you're shopping for healthy things, and then how you cook, and then how do you put that stuff away, and then how do you clean your kitchen? Like, okay, well, this is marble. What do I use to clean this marble? There's some things that are bad to use for certain materials. Okay, and I'm cleaning the dishes. I'm loading the dishwasher. That's a fun one. How do you load the dishwasher correctly if there's been a number of squabbles around the world on that one, right?
Yeah. Every relationship, it all comes down to how the dishes are done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the beauty of this course is we look at all of that stuff, right? And just like we have on the show here, we say it as little as a weekend because it can be if you really want to crash through it. But the nice thing is you have that course forever, so you can do it at your own pace. And even if you do crash through it all at once, well, now you have that and you can always go back to it, right? Or even if you just want to take it at a slower pace, like, all right, I'm just going to watch a video a day or a couple of videos a week or whatever. It's a way for you to level up your cooking game. So please check that out. Kickstart Your Kitchen. It literally is to help you, right, revolutionize your cooking game. And not only will it improve your life, but it'll improve the lives of people around you. And also, guess what? You're going to feel good about it because you're going to be making some delicious stuff. The more you cook at home, the more likely you are probably to save money. And it's a great excuse to have people come over, give yourself an activity to do with your family or your friends. So there's just so many good things about it. But I think that's about it for today. Do you have any challenges on the top of mind?
Oh no, I keep thinking about the Poka-yoke thing though.
Yeah.
That's what's really stuck into my head is like, is there one thing I can do for myself that's Poka-yoke?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a great challenge. And I kind of alluded to that earlier, I think. And I think we'll stick with that for our official episode challenge. So, what is one area of your life that you could apply Poka-yoke? You know, we mentioned one way is, you know, when you're talking over email or Slack or whatever, as you're trying to get somebody to do something for you. Or, hey, maybe instead of sending a text message, maybe you call somebody and you talk with them and maybe even have them repeat back to you what they heard to make sure that, hey, all right, did you really get what's going on? Or maybe instead of saying, hey, spouse, remind me when I get home to do this, use your device. Tell Siri, tell Alexa, tell them to remind you. You can do it based on location or time. That's a very big one, you know, is don't stop. If you are struggling to remember something, just because your spouse or your friend or someone is better than you, doesn't mean you should rely on them for that. Use a machine where you can.
Yeah. There's other things too that you can do for your health, such as like if you don't drink enough water, just put water around yourself. All that, like, you know, if you just put cups of water around you, you're bound to start drinking them when you get thirsty. But if they're not there, you won't do it, so you'll stay dehydrated. So there's some little behavioral hacks as well, and that's like James Clear talks about the water thing. So there might just be something that's that simple, just helping set yourself up with a system that just makes your life easier, maybe makes your health better as well.
Yeah, and since you mentioned the water, I've got to mention the food as well, right? The food that you have visible and easily accessible is most likely to get eaten, right? And so if you're trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, if you put those in a very prominent spot where, you know, they're going to be seen, they're going to be wanted, and maybe if you do have some snacks that are a little healthier and not like the chips and things like that, well, put those chips and those junk food like away in a corner or whatnot, where it's like you can still get to them, but you got to work for them a little bit. Otherwise, you got this thing right here where you just walk by and you grab it, and then, you know, kind of help train you that way. So apply some Poka-yoke today. That's it.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay.
All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful rest. Everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.